there, today I'm planting garlic, and while the planting process is actually quite simple, often beginners will find themselves with questions they didn't know to ask. So as you join me in planting next year's crop of garlic, I'll share with you how many I plant and how I determined ideal quantity, where I bought some new seed garlic, but how I'm planting most of my garlic from this year's harvest, how I'm preparing the soil, and why I'm planting today. It has a lot to do with the weather forecast. I'll also share why my garlic cloves are soaking and what this even is. All right, let's get to planting. I'm gonna be planting the garlic this year in mostly this bed right here. This is a 4x8, but I'm also gonna be planting some in this 4x8 bed, mainly around the perimeters. I'm not really sure that I'm gonna get all of the garlic planted in this bed yet, just because we haven't had our frost. It looks like maybe next week. So I still have squash and I have some peppers in this bed that I'm just not quite ready to take out. But this bed in particular, this was the bed that bush beans were grown in later in the summer. After I harvested those, I added a layer of chicken manure and pine shavings from my chicken coop. So I'm gonna go ahead and get ready to prepare this soil to plant, because there's one more thing that I like to add when I'm getting ready to plant garlic. Even though this chicken manure and pine shavings mixture has been decomposing for about 6 to 8 weeks or so, there's still some pine shavings on the top, and I really want to rake that aside. I can put it back when I'm done planting the garlic because it'll be a fantastic mulch, but I really want to be able to plant the garlic in the soil and in the compost I'm getting ready to add. So in order to do that, I'm actually going to lift up the Garden in Minutes garden grid. And this makes it really easy to go from one crop to another. It just kind of lifts up like that, and then I can pull it out of the way. And now I'm just gonna take my rake and then slowly rake the top. There's really not a whole lot of this pine shaving mix left because a lot of it has decomposed. Looks like there was a onion left over from the onion harvest. And mainly I'm just wanting a good, almost like a seed bed, even though we're not planting seed, we're planting seed garlic. So a little bit left over is fine, but I'm just basically bringing the top layer over, and any weeds that have grown, I can take that out. You can just kind of see right here, the top layer of this soil is actually very nice looking. It's moist because the Garden in Minutes garden grid has been still keeping the moisture level intact. And you may think, why didn't you shut the water off when there was nothing growing in it? I like to keep the water in here because microbial life that is nourishing the soil needs some moisture. And then what we're gonna do is being able to plant the garlic in this moist soil. So this is actually really good quality, but I'm gonna add a layer of compost to this before I get ready to plant. What I'm using here is a compost / topsoil blend. And I buy it in bulk because I definitely want it to be very well composted, well broken down, a very fine tilth. Now, if I wasn't planting immediately in here, I might use my homemade compost because it's in varying degrees of decomposition. But for this, I'm just sprinkling on the top. And really, I don't need much, but I wanted to be able to add some extra fertility and some extra organic matter to the bed before I plant. A lot of people ask me, how do I fertilize my garlic? And honestly, I don't think in the 8 or so years I've grown garlic that I've ever fertilized them. Instead, I work on making sure that whatever soil they're planted in is high in organic matter. I add a little bit of nitrogen. Usually this time it's from my own chicken manure, but I feel like being able to set the stage early and get a good planting bed with good ingredients from the beginning allows me not to have to worry about doing much fertilizing, if at all, in the spring. The next thing that I do, and this is optional, is I use a broad fork to kind of break up and aerate the soil. This is not required depending on the tilth of your soil and how compacted it may or may not be, but I found this to be actually very helpful for raised bed soil in particular, just to be able to bring some oxygen without having to till. So this has been a really helpful tool for me, especially in raised bed gardening. This also will help the compost to be able to drop down a little bit more and to incorporate better with the soil that's already there. And it'll make planting the garlic cloves even easier. One thing I love about the Garden in Minutes garden grid, besides just the even watering and how easy it's been all season long to put it on a timer and not have to worry about watering, is that it actually works really well as a plant spacing guide. And this would be the case with the garlic as well, being able to get the rows where they need to be, make sure the proper plant spacing is created. So I just put this right back on there when I'm done amending the soil. As I'm preparing to plant the garlic, let's talk about how I decided how many garlic cloves I'm going to plant. Now keep in mind that each clove that is planted will produce one bulb. Now the size of that bulb will depend on the variety, it'll depend on the growing conditions, lots of different things. But for every clove you plant, you can expect a bulb. So in a very basic sense, you want to try to estimate how much garlic you go through in your kitchen. So let's say you go through a bulb a week, and hopefully you're growing a type of garlic, at least in some part of your garden, like a soft neck that will last a long time, maybe up to a year, that's the goal, then you're gonna be wanting 52 cloves of garlic planted at minimum. I'm actually growing about 130. When I started thinking about how many I wanted to grow, I took a look at this season's harvest and how many I got. Was it too many? Was it not enough? And I felt like in looking at my stock and what I have left to last me until the next harvest, I felt like 130 actually worked out well. We may not use a bulb of garlic a week, but I do want to save some for next season's planting, which is what I've done this time. And I also dehydrate for garlic powder. So that's why I'm growing probably about 130, and plus that just gives you a little fudge room in case you have some that don't turn out as well. After I considered that this year's harvest was the perfect amount, I looked back at last year's garden plan to figure out how many I actually planted. From there, I considered that I wanted to grow in these two raised beds, and I wanted to decide where I wanted the garlic to grow. With two 4x8 raised beds, I really didn't need the entire space for garlic. I only needed about one full one and then one half one, maybe not even half. So at that point, I decided, okay, where do I want the different varieties of garlic to go in the bed? To do that, I had to count and see how many cloves of the different varieties that I had on hand. This year, I decided to get 2 new varieties of garlic to try in my garden. That's one thing. I could just plant everything that I harvested from last year, but I like trying different varieties just to see if I find one that I like better. And this year, I tried 2 different kinds from Epic Gardening. One was Chestnut Red and one was Sicilian Artichoke. I ordered those from Epic Gardening, and then when they came in, I opened them up to see how many cloves ended up being in each bulb. Now, when you're ordering seed garlic, a lot of times they will estimate like 9 to 12 cloves per bulb. That's pretty typical for a hard neck. Sometimes soft necks, you get more than that. So you can estimate when you're ordering about how many will be there. But what I wanted to do is open them up and see how many I actually had. And I wanted to make sure that I had good large cloves. I don't want to plant the really small slivers of garlic because they're not going to produce huge bulbs. Instead, I'll keep those and I'll save those just to cook with. So yes, you can order seed garlic, plant the bigger cloves, and then go ahead and cook with the smaller ones, even if there's ones that you ordered online. That's the first thing I did, was to count out how many of the ones that I ordered that I had. The second thing that I did was, after I subtracted, okay, I need about 130 cloves of garlic, and this is how many I have of the ones that I ordered. At that point, I'm going to my seed stock. The first thing that I did was I wanted to see how many of the hard neck varieties that I was able to save from this season's planting I had, just because hard neck does not grow as well in my southern climate. I'm in a zone 7B in Arkansas. I tend to get much better harvest from soft necks. So my supply of the hard neck varieties that I harvested this year was limited, and I wanted to be able to get what I could from those. After I took the ones that I felt like were good enough to be able to plant the larger cloves, then I counted those out. And then from there, I subtracted again to see how many that I needed to finish up. And from that, I was able to use the soft neck garlic that I've been growing in my garden for years, saving each year. My favorite variety is the red Enchilium, and it's really performed really well in my garden. And from what I hear, it performs well in a lot of different places. From there, then I finished up my 130 by getting the soft neck garlic ready to go. From there, since I knew how many of each one that I needed, I looked at my garden layout to decide where I was going to put each variety. For this particular 4x8 bed, I'm planting 6 rows of garlic going this way. Now, I could plant more than that, but one thing that I've learned that I really enjoy doing is I love to companion / succession plant peppers or another hotter or warmer season crop in the middle. Instead of planting a middle 2 rows of garlic in the center, which I totally could if I just wanted a whole bed of garlic, I decided to leave about a foot in the middle to be able to have a planting of peppers next year in between the garlic. I have then 3 rows in the front, which this is the south side, and then I have 3 rows in the back, and this is the north side. I decided to plant the soft neck garlic on the south side, mainly because in my experience, soft neck garlic harvests a little bit earlier than hard neck. So I thought it'd be really good to get the soft neck harvested so that the peppers could take advantage of the southern sun quicker in the season. Sometimes the garlic is so tall that those early peppers get a little bit too shaded. So I wanted to be able to get those out. And then the hard neck varieties can be in the north, which would be no problem at all. They're gonna be tall, so the peppers are not gonna bother them, and they can stay a little bit longer. And I felt like that would be the better choice. So the soft neck garlic's going in on the south side. The hard neck garlic is going on the north side. For the other bed, I didn't need to fill that entire bed. So instead, I'm trying something that I've never done before, but I've heard other people say that it's really good. And that is, I'm planting garlic on the perimeter of the bed with the hopes that the companion planting benefits will help to deter pests. We'll see. I've heard that it works out well, and maybe even deterring rabbits. I've still had issues with rabbits getting in the garden, especially in the early spring, so maybe that will help. So that'll be a fun experiment for that bed. But this behind me is the main garlic bed. I'm gonna go ahead and get started planting those rows. The furthest row back here, I'm going to be planting a red hardneck garlic, and I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember what variety it was. It's whatever I saved from last year. I'll have to go look it up. But with soil that's this loose, a lot of times all I have to do is to press it down into the soil. And the depth that we're planting will depend on your climate. Since I live in a more mild season climate, I don't have to push it down too far, and I don't really have to mulch it all that heavily because our ground typically doesn't freeze. But that's what I'm doing here. And as far as the plant spacing, you can see I'm going 2 garlic cloves per square. This works out to about 6 inches apart, maybe a little bit less, but I found that 6 inch apart tends to produce better harvest in general. I don't like to get them any closer because they tend to compete with one another. So that's why I try to keep the spacing the way it is. These are definitely pushing it maybe a little bit too close together, but I think it'll be okay. I've got all of these spaced out and I'm just gonna push them in the ground. When you have loose soil, that makes it so much easier. The next variety I'm planting is Music. And this is one that I've really enjoyed. It's a hardneck variety that has done really well in my climate. I mentioned at the beginning why I'm planting right now. Garlic is pretty adaptable at when you're gonna plant, as long as you plant sometime around your average first frost date. But you can plant a little bit before that, a little bit after that, depending on how cold your winters can get. Mainly you want the plant established before the freezes come. Now, if you live in a northern climate, you may or may not get green garlic shoots coming out, but in the south, that's very common and that's perfectly normal. In fact, I really like to have my garlic shoots coming out before the cold sets in, and then they'll start regrowing back in the spring. But the reason I'm planting today, our average last frost date is next week, give or take, you know, sometimes those vary depending on where you look, is because we're getting a lot of rain in the next week or so, and I love to time my garlic planting right around the time that rain arrives. And the reason for that is because as much as I love having the supplemental irrigation, rainfall is just so much better for our soil and for our plants. And that's why I like to time it where I don't have to irrigate, I don't have to water. I can get these in the ground and I can plan on Mother Nature taking care of getting a good rainfall in to get these plants established. The final hardneck garlic I'm going to be planting over here on the north side is the Chestnut Red. This is a purple striped garlic that I got from Epic Gardening. I've never tried this variety before. I'm excited about it. It's supposed to have a mild flavor, but also really good roasted. We'll see how it does. And you may be wondering why I have my garlic cloves soaking in this brown liquid. Soaking your garlic cloves is not something that's required. In fact, I planted for many years without soaking my garlic, with still having fabulous harvests. Last year was the first year that I ever tried soaking garlic cloves. And I found that the ones that did get soaked at harvest were just a little bit bigger than the ones that didn't get soaked. And then organic Rev is something that I use often, most of the time in transplant, because it is really good at helping plants' roots establish. And that's what I really want, obviously, with this garlic, is I want the roots to establish, so that way when spring comes, they can really get going. Organic Rev also helps the plant to be able to uptake the organic nutrients that are in the soil, which with the compost, the chicken manure, I've been adding that. So I definitely like having the Organic Rev there to be able to help the plants uptake those nutrients better. So that's why I soak them in the Organic Rev mixture. I didn't really even measure it. I just put a little bit in a watering can and added water. You really can't overdo it. Do with what you have. I think the recommended amount to water with is about 1 ounce per gallon. I probably did a little bit more than that, but really I just did a little, knowing that even a little would make a difference. I ran out of the chestnut red here, and I have about 5 more spaces. So if I have any extra soft neck, I'll probably plant that in these spaces. But I'm gonna go ahead and plant this soft neck on the south side to get these planted in the side of the bed. You may notice that I'm leaving a little bit of room over here by the arch trellis. That will give me the option to grow something over here beside the arch trellis and up the arch trellis, like cucumbers or beans or something like that. So I'm only going to right here, and I have about a little over a foot to be able to plant other crops to grow up the arch trellis next year. Looks like I have 2 more spaces here if I want to add some more garlic. I may go to my garlic stalk and get that at some point, but for now I'm going to show you what I do after I plant, because there's one final step. I'm going to go ahead and take the extra Organic Rev and water. It's always good to add it to the soil. I could dilute it if I wanted to in water and make it go further. The last thing I'm going to do here is add mulch. Adding mulch is much more critical the further north you get, the colder winters you get. In fact, some people add as many as 4 to 6 inches of mulch on top of their garlic. In Arkansas, in Zone 7B, we don't need that much mulch because our ground rarely freezes, but mulch is really important, especially when the garlic starts to grow in January and February, to be able to prevent weeds. Garlic doesn't compete well with weeds, so the more you can keep the area clear of weeds, the bigger the bulbs have potential to grow. I'm going to be mulching in 2 ways this year. The first thing I'm going to do is pull back the chicken manure / pine shavings. Most of them are pine shavings. To do that, I'm going to pull back the garden grid and just take the mulch that I cleared out earlier and just put it back. There's not a whole lot of this left, so I'm not going to be able to only do this, but I want to do it first because it does have that mixture of chicken manure, and I'd like to get that closer to the soil so that it can offer some nitrogen to the garlic as needed. I also have some fallen pine needles here from our pine trees around here. I don't really worry too much about that because there's not enough to really make a huge difference in the pH. Some people are worried about that, but I haven't found it to be an issue. Okay, so that's not enough mulch to cover. So what I'm gonna do next is add some shredded leaves. These shredded leaves were from last season that I had stored, but fresh shredded leaves will work just fine. I've done that as well. I'm gonna be adding these with my shovel because when I went to grab these, I guess some fire ants had made their home quite nicely in there, and I don't want to have to deal with fire ants, but you can do this by hand if you want to. It doesn't have to be perfect. Another thing that I found with shredded leaves is that the more I use this as mulch, the more I realize that the tilth of my soil, the structure of my soil gets so much more healthy over time. So I really enjoy using shredded leaves on my garden. That's usually my final garden task of the year, is to go get leaves from my family's property. We don't have really any deciduous leaves on mine, but I'll take the shredder to my dad's house and we'll shred leaves on site and bring it back here. This is what most of this is. Now I don't have to smooth this out, but I'm going to, so the garden grids can lay flat, which is important for them. I don't see that I'm probably gonna need to irrigate anymore this season, so I'll probably shut off the timer depending on how much rain we end up getting the next couple of days. And then I'll probably try to do what I can to get the water out, but I'll leave these on here. In my climate, I'll leave them on all winter. Of course, we'll unhook the faucets and all of that stuff, but the grids themselves, I leave out in the winter. So the main bed of garlic is now planted. Next, I'll go onto that bed. I think I'll be able to get some of the sides, but then I may need to wait until after a frost passes to finish up. But this is pretty much how it's done. Hopefully this has helped you to be able to know how many to plant, how to calculate it, and then what varieties you might want to grow in your garden. Truly, I have found that garlic is the easiest crop I grow, hands down, in my entire garden, because this is pretty much all it takes. And then as long as we're able to keep a good layer of mulch going, all I have to do really is harvest. And for me, that's in June. For you, that might be in May or July, but I really won't have to do anything else until harvest time next June. If a step-by-step guide would help you to be able to grow garlic in your garden, I have a free garlic planting cheat sheet that you can download below. I'll have the link in the description, and that will get you started growing garlic, one of the easiest crops that you can grow in your garden as soon as possible. I hope you enjoyed this time with me while I was planting my garlic in the garden. For more videos like these, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks.